The laughter hit me before the door even clicked shut behind me. It wasn't the warm, bubbly sound of genuine joy, the kind that spills over from shared jokes and good wine. This was different. It was sharp, high-pitched, and a little feral, like a flock of starlings that had learned how to gossip. It was the sound of a firing squad enjoying their work. Someone was the target, and as my eyes adjusted to the lamplight of my own living room, a cold certainty settled in my gut. The target was me. My home had been rearranged. The comfortable, lived-in space I'd left that morning was gone, replaced by something stark and ceremonial. 5 women were seated in a perfect, disciplined circle, their wine glasses sweating obediently on coasters. In the center, on our coffee table, notebooks were splayed open, like hymnals at a particularly severe church service. And there, front and center, was my wife, Ilara. She held a sheet of lined paper with the kind of reverence usually reserved for diplomas or birth certificates. Her head snapped up, her bright smile faltering for a microsecond as she took me in. "Oh, look, speak of the devil," said Sabrina, the one with a ponytail so tight it seemed to be pulling her eyebrows into a permanent state of surprise. It had to be causing honest, theological doubts about the concept of free will. "Perfect timing," Ilara beamed, her voice saccharine bright, recovering instantly. "Honey, we're doing something fun." Fun. The word echoed in the sudden quiet of the room. Fun is a word with many costumes. It wears a party dress for birthdays and a comfortable sweater for movie nights. But it wears something entirely different, something cold and tailored, like a uniform when 5 women are seated in a circle with pens loaded like tranquilizer darts. "We're making a list," Paige announced, her pen already dancing across a fresh page. She was the group's self-appointed secretary, her expression one of diligent purpose. "Guidelines to make marriages better. For husbands." Guidelines. Adorable. Like calling a subpoena a friendly reminder. I set my keys in the ceramic dish by the door. The clink of metal on pottery sounded unnaturally loud, like the bell at a boxing ring signaling the start of a round I hadn't known I was fighting. "A list, huh?" I kept my voice light, casual. "What number are you on?" 18, Ilara said, practically glowing. She waggled the page at me like a prize. "Do you want to hear some?" The room was primed for a reaction. The air crackled with it. That was the game, I realized. You bait the bear, you poke it with a stick, and then you film it for Instagram when it finally roars. They hadn't invited me to a conversation. They'd summoned me to a performance. My performance. I forced a smile, the kind that lies politely through its teeth. I walked over, pulled up an ottoman from the corner, and settled into their circle, as if I'd just been invited to a poker night. As if I belonged. "Please," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Read me your wisdom." Rule 1 arrived as if it had been waiting in the wings all day, impatient for its grand entrance. "All major decisions require wife approval," Ilara declared, her voice ringing with the clarity of a prophetess sharing a divine revelation. "Career changes, large purchases, social commitments. Define major," I asked, my feigned politeness, a thin veneer over the ice forming in my veins. Lorraine, a woman in a stiff blazer that seemed to have its own internal skeleton, pursed her lips. "You know," she said condescendingly. "Major." "Of course," I said, nodding slowly. "The dictionary will love that definition." So clear. A few tight, unamused smiles flickered around the circle. They kept going, undeterred. Rule 7 apparently belonged to Giselle, who looked like the type of person to alphabetize her spice rack and enjoy it. "Daily gratitude speech," she read from her notes, her voice chipper. 2 minutes minimum. He thanks her for everything she does for him and for the household. I nodded again, stroking my chin in mock contemplation. Will there be a teleprompter provided, or is a hostage note format acceptable? This time the smiles didn't even flicker. My sarcasm had been registered, logged, and filed under unappreciated. The air grew a little colder. Rule 11 came from Lorraine again, her voice crisp and final. "No hanging out with single friends. They're a bad influence. Freedom is contagious." Cassidy, the one with dramatically arched eyebrows, chimed in with a theatrical sigh. "It's tragic, really." "Oh, tragic," I agreed gravely. "We should probably mandate masks for that, to prevent the spread." Then came Rule 15, presented by Cassidy herself. He dresses according to her preferences for all social events. No more fashion independence. Her eyes flicked down to my simple Henley and jeans. It was my uniform. The attire of a man who buys his shirts in packs of 3 from the same store he's gone to for a decade. Dead simple. I'll burn my closet tonight, I promised. And I'll issue a public apology to my collection of flannel shirts. The circle hummed with self-satisfied approval. Nothing terrifies a committee quite like unsupervised joy. But they had saved the best for last. And number 18? I asked, my voice as mild as if I were inquiring about a rare cheese. Paige looked up from her notebook, her expression brisk and businesslike. A weekly allowance, tied to compliance, she said. Good behavior is rewarded, poor behavior is penalized. And, like airline miles, I said, the smile finally dropping from my face. Except the only destination is your own life. That was the first time someone looked away. It was Giselle, a tiny crack in the united front. I leaned forward slightly. Enforcement? I asked lightly. It's all just theory without enforcement. Their faces brightened. This, clearly, was their favorite part. The toy they'd been waiting to unwrap. Withholding privileges, Sabrina said, her ponytail bobbing. Social pressure, Lorraine added. Community accountability. Financial consequences, Paige recited from her notes. And if necessary, public embarrassment, Alara concluded, looking at me as if she were offering me a gift. I waited for them to mention branding with a hot spoon, but they seemed to have restrained themselves, probably to leave room for quarterly innovation in the field of spousal tyranny. I watched Alara. She was drinking in their approval like a woman in a desert who had just stumbled upon a sprinkler system. This wasn't the woman I married. The woman I married was a force of nature who made up her own mind and dealt with the fallout without needing a cheer squad. This new version, this stranger in my living room, had outsourced her thinking and contracted out her righteousness. Just so I understand, I said, my voice dangerously calm. These are rules made by wives, enforced by wives, and applied to husbands. Are there any rules for the wives in this new system? A beat of silence. Paige's pen let out a small, nervous squeak against the page. We don't need rules, Lorraine said, her tone suggesting this was the most obvious thing in the world. We're naturally relationship-focused. Right, I said. Like owls are naturally wise and cats are naturally honest taxpayers. Elara's smile flickered. It was a tiny thing, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. It's a tiny sound when a facade cracks, like the room finally learning how to exhale. Did you ask your husbands what they think might improve your marriages? I asked the room at large. The silence that followed was a different kind. It was the kind that rustles its skirt and pretends to be deep in thought. We base them on experience, Lorraine said stiffly, which is usually code for we took a vote inside our own heads, I countered. Peer-reviewed in the journal of each other, I see. They were annoyed now. I could feel the air harden. They hadn't invited a participant. They'd summoned an audience. Unfortunately for them, I'd brought opinions. Look, Caleb, Ilara said, adopting the tone people use when they've decided your valid objections are just your personality being difficult. If you just listen with an open mind, we can present the full list. Think of it as an orientation for our new, improved marriage. Orientation, I repeated pleasantly, like a theme park. Do we get wristbands? Is there a height requirement for respect? A few snickers, quickly suppressed. Then came the look, passed between them like a secret handshake. He's being childish, so let's be the bigger people and ignore it. Pens were poised again. Spines straightened, the tribunal posture. I leaned back, folding my hands behind my head. I appreciate the effort, I really do. 18 rules is ambitious. But before you walk me through them, I have a request. They all perked up. Finally, the docile animal was learning a trick. Just one rule, I said. One I'd like to add. For balance. Ilara glanced at Sabrina. Sabrina glanced at Lorraine. Lorraine glanced at Cassidy, who glanced at Giselle, who glanced back at Ilara. It was a circular chain of permission. A silent, instantaneous board meeting. They didn't make decisions. They passed them around until the edges were worn smooth, and no single person was responsible. Fine, Ilara said finally, the designated spokesperson for the collective. One rule, then we go through ours. I stood up, slowly. You don't hurry this part. You let the floorboards learn your weight again. I walked a short, deliberate line between their circle and the coffee table, placing myself in the center of their carefully constructed stage. The paper in Ilara's hand, I noticed, shook just enough to make the shadows from the lamp twitch. 18 is thorough, I said, my voice even. It shows real dedication. My rule is simpler. It's not even a paragraph. It's a sentence. An axiom. Something you could embroider on a pillow if you were feeling particularly brave. Oh. Across the circle, Paige flipped to a fresh page in her notebook. Her pen hovered over the paper like a scalpel before the first incision. I let a beat pass, then another. The room learned the shape of the silence and sat very still inside it. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a mundane noise in a moment that felt anything but. Here it is, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. I met Alara's eyes first, then let my gaze travel around the circle, holding each woman's stare for a second. Any woman who participates in making rules to control her husband automatically consents to the same rules being made for her. The laughter didn't just die. It fell off a cliff and shattered on the rocks below. Alara's smile slid off her face like a cheap sticker losing its grip. Cassidy blinked several times, her dramatic eyebrows frozen mid-arch. Lorraine's pen made a small, apologetic black dot on the clean white page. Sabrina stared at me as if I'd just calmly suggested a new climate where gravity sometimes works and sometimes prefers not to. What? Alara started, then stopped, because the word what suddenly had nowhere safe to go. It means, I said gently, as if explaining a simple concept to a child, that the door you just opened swings both ways. If unilateral control is the new gospel, then congratulations. You've all found religion, and the sermon applies to you too. That's not the same, Lorraine said. The words a reflexive defense uttered without thought. People always say that when it is exactly the same, I replied. My voice still soft. Isn't it? You've just spent an hour arguing that husbands are improved by oversight, by a clear set of guidelines and consequences. I'm simply honoring your premise. It seems only fair that people who believe in remodeling their spouses without consent probably need a bit of supervision themselves. Paige set her pen down. She didn't just place it on the notebook. She set it down carefully, deliberately, like you'd set down a hot pan you mistakenly thought was cool. We were just brainstorming, she mumbled, looking at the floor. I glanced at the neat columns, the numbered items, the tidy bullet points, the enforcement plans underlined twice. Brainstorming, I echoed. Hurricanes are also technically weather events. Giselle swallowed hard. You wouldn't, actually. Actually what? I finished for her. Apply your own logic to you. Ask your husbands what they think. Bring a little sunlight into this lab you've created. The temperature in the room seemed to shift, dropping 3 degrees in as many seconds. It's funny how quickly absolute certainty learns how to shiver. I'm happy to listen to all 18 rules, I said, and my voice was suddenly calm in a way that made everyone else's pulse do the jumping for them. But from this moment forward, we are operating in a world where the maker of the leash wears one too. If you don't like the fit, maybe you shouldn't have been so proud of the invention. No one laughed. The tribunal had misplaced its humor, possibly underneath the couch with the lost television remotes and their vanished courage. Shall we proceed? I asked, smiling with my teeth but not my eyes. No one answered, but I didn't need an answer. I had the room, I had the silence, and I had their rule book, balanced in Alara's trembling hand, like a promise nobody wanted to keep anymore. Paige, ever the secretary of this suburban cult, clutched her pen like it was the staff of Moses, about to part a sea of common sense that was threatening to drown them all. That's not fair, she muttered, her knuckles whitening. We were only trying to… To what? I cut in, my voice sharper now. Run a science experiment on me? Write a beginner's guide to controlling your husband? Don't undersell yourselves, Paige. That notebook in your lap isn't filled with doodles and shopping lists. It's a constitution if dictatorships issued them in glitter ink. Alara shifted uncomfortably, a flush creeping up her neck. She tried to salvage the momentum, to regain the moral high ground she thought she owned. Caleb, honey, you're overreacting. We weren't actually going to enforce any of this. Funny, I said, turning my gaze on her, because 10 minutes ago, Lorraine here was explaining your enforcement mechanisms with the zeal of a prison warden. Withholding privileges, public shaming, financial penalties. That's not a game, Alara. That's a business plan for tyranny. Lorraine's face went crimson. We didn't mean it literally. Of course not, I said smoothly. Just like bank robbers don't literally mean it when they write the note. It's more of a creative expression. Sabrina leaned forward, her ponytail sharp enough to cut glass. She was trying to recover the alpha energy that had filled the room just a short while ago. A smirk played on her lips. You're being incredibly dramatic. We were just brainstorming ways to keep husbands accountable. Accountable, I echoed, tasting the word. A lovely word. It almost sounds noble, until you realize it's just a leash disguised as jewelry. Ilara bristled. We just want more structure. Structure? I barked out a laugh, short and harsh. Ilara, you sound like you're pitching me a new office cubicle system. This is a marriage, not an IKEA assembly project. The women fidgeted. Their wine was suddenly too warm in their glasses. Their pens suddenly too heavy in their hands. For a group that had been cackling like hyenas over my supposed shortcomings, they were astonishingly fragile under the bare bulb of logic. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my voice dropping lower, calmer, deadlier. Let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't a comedy sketch. You had 18 rules, numbered, detailed, with punishments and implementation strategies. Paige, you even underlined community enforcement. Don't insult my intelligence by telling me you were just joking. Nobody writes a 3-page manifesto on organized dictatorship for a few laughs. The silence pressed in on us, heavy and suffocating. Giselle, the one who had been so excited about her daily gratitude speeches, tried for levity. Okay, fine. Maybe we got a little carried away. Carried away? I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. Ilara just announced that if I fail a weekly performance review, she'll revoke my privileges. What am I? Her 12-year-old son, grounded for forgetting to mow the lawn? Ilara's face flinched, as if the mirror had finally shown her the clown makeup she'd been so proudly wearing. But before the guilt could fully bloom, Cassidy piped up, arching her brows like she was auditioning for Villain of the Week. Don't you think you're being a bit defensive? If you have nothing to hide, why are you so threatened by a few simple rules? Oh, Cassidy, I said, shaking my head. You're mistaking resistance for guilt. But I get it. You're probably used to lecturing your husband until he pretends to agree just to get you to stop talking. That tactic won't work here. Her mouth snapped shut like a mousetrap. I let the pause linger, then casually pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't unlock it. I didn't even look at it. I just set it on my knee, screen down. The reaction was volcanic. Paige stiffened, as if she'd been tased. Sabrina's smirk evaporated. Lorraine muttered, "Oh, God." Cassidy's perfect brows furrowed in genuine alarm, and Giselle nearly spilled her Merlot. Ilara's eyes widened, locking onto the dark rectangle of plastic and glass on my knee. What are you doing? Me, I asked innocently, tapping the phone with one finger. Just wondering how much Dave would enjoy hearing about Rule 13. You know, the one about mandatory chores assigned by committee. Or maybe Ethan would be fascinated to learn his wife Lorraine thinks he needs financial supervision. I bet the look on his face would be priceless. Don't, Paige blurted out, her voice loud and sharp. You can't involve them. Why not? I asked sweetly. You just spent 20 minutes talking about involving the wives from the community. Social pressure, remember? If the husbands are to be policed, surely they deserve to know the bylaws of their own precinct. Oh. Ilara lunged forward, panic flaring in her eyes. Caleb, please don't do this. It'll ruin everything. Ruin what exactly, Ilara? I asked, leaning back, twirling the phone between my fingers like a coin. This little utopia of female supremacy you've been building? Or our marriage, which you apparently thought was so deficient it needed a performance review? Her lip trembled. Giselle whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. He'll never let me go out again if he finds out. I pounced. Let you, I repeated, my voice slicing through the tense air. An interesting choice of words, Giselle. Sounds like you already know what boundaries look like. You just prefer them to be a one-way street. The room was suffocating now, heavy with the stench of fear and backpedaling. Perfect. Exactly where I wanted them. I picked up Paige's notebook from the coffee table, its pages filled with their arrogant pronouncements. I flipped to a random page and read aloud, my voice devoid of emotion. Weekly performance review. Graded A through F. Failure to achieve a passing grade results in revocation of social privileges for 7 days. I slammed the book shut, the sound making them all jump. Tell me again how this was all just venting. Not one of them spoke. Their eyes flicked nervously to Ilara, who sat frozen, the queen of a collapsing empire. I placed the notebook gently back on the coffee table. Then I stood, towering over their little circle. Ladies, I said evenly, you wanted rules. You wanted accountability. Congratulations. You're about to get both, just not in the way you imagined. Honey, please, Ilara whispered, her voice a fragile thread. But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I had the floor, and I intended to use it. I paced around them like a teacher, about to hand back exams, and everyone knew they had failed. Do you know what fascinates me most about this? I asked softly. The breathtaking hypocrisy. When you hold the leash, it's empowerment. But when I so much as touch my phone, it's tyranny. When you write a system of punishments, it's a clever strategy. But when I read it out loud, it's suddenly cruel. Silence. It was apparently the only rule they were willing to follow without a grading rubric. I plucked the notebook from the table again. This time I looked at it more closely. Its pages were a collaborative masterpiece of pettiness. Alara's neat looping handwriting, Paige's efficient bullet points, Sabrina's aggressive underlines, Lorraine's smug little stars in the margins, Cassidy's doodled exclamation marks, and Giselle's color-coded highlighter stripes. I tore out the first page. Reap. The sound ricocheted around the room. All 5 women flinched as if I'd fired a gun. Rule 1, I said, letting the shredded page flutter to the floor. Wife approval for all major decisions. Gone. I tore out another. Reap. Rules 2 through 5. Joint custody of my spine. Gone. Alara's mascara was shimmering in her eyes, trembling at the brink. Please, stop. Stop? I asked, my voice hard as granite. Funny, that word wasn't on your list. I read enforcement, punishment, privilege revocation. I don't recall a single clause about mercy. Another page, another rip. The floor around my feet was littered with the shredded decrees of their short-lived regime, scraps of authoritarianism carpeting my living room, like confetti from the world's worst parade. Lorraine tried to stand. This is pointless. We're leaving. I barked a laugh. Leaving? You're welcome to walk out that door. But don't you dare pretend this never happened. These scraps aren't going back in the notebook, Lorraine. You can't tape your arrogance back together again. Endo. She sank back into her chair. Her stiff blazer suddenly looked less like a power suit and more like a straitjacket. I dropped the half-empty, mutilated notebook back on the table. Its spine was cracked, its authority gutted. Then I leaned on the back of an armchair, my knuckles pressed white. Respect, I said evenly. Respect isn't a rule you can legislate like zoning laws. It isn't something you can bullet point into existence. It's earned. And tonight, every single one of you decided to spend your evening systematically destroying it. Cassidy sniffled, her perfect eyebrows quivering. Giselle's hands shook so badly she had to set her wine glass on the floor before it shattered. Sabrina, usually the loudest one in any room, chewed her lip like a child caught with a stolen toy. And Alara, my wife, my supposed partner, just looked at me with eyes that were swollen and wet, the fire gone, the queen dethroned. You want to know the difference between men and women when it comes to conflict like this? I asked, pacing again. When women get upset, they form committees. They write lists. They build support groups to validate their feelings and plan their strategy. I paused, letting the silence carve its own gravestone in the center of the room. When men get upset, we just leave. That line landed like a guillotine. Every face snapped up to me, raw panic breaking across them like waves against a seawall. Alara's lips trembled. You don't mean that. I walked toward the door, fishing my keys from the dish. The same keys that had clinked like a boxing bell when I first walked into this circus. Oh, I mean every last syllable. I slipped on my jacket, my movements calm and slow, letting the crushing weight of inevitability sink into the room. You wanted rules? Here's mine. I don't live in a house where my dignity is a negotiable item on a meeting agenda. Paige's voice cracked. Please don't tell our husbands. I don't need to, I said, my voice as cold as winter steel, because I'm not staying here to play house according to your supervision manual. Alara lurched forward, grabbing my arm, her mascara finally streaking down her cheeks in black rivulets. Please, Caleb, don't do this. Don't leave. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I wanted to fit in. And fit in? I cut her off, yanking my arm free from her grasp. You humiliated your husband in front of your friends. You drafted a blueprint to put my life in a cage, and you had the audacity to call it empowerment. That's not fitting in, Alara. That's betrayal dressed up in group therapy. I opened the door. The cool night air spilled in, honest and sharp, a welcome antidote to the room's toxic atmosphere. I looked back one last time at the tableau. 5 women, frozen on the couch like schoolgirls caught shoplifting. My wife, standing in the wreckage of her pathetic little empire, her eyes red, her hands empty. I'm leaving for a week, I said flatly. You have 7 days to decide if you want to be my partner or their disciple. When I come back, I expect to have my answer. And if you choose them, congratulations. You'll have plenty of girls' nights, but you won't have a marriage. And with that, I shut the door. The sound was final. A judge's gavel on their foolish, pathetic little courtroom. The car engine roared to life. In the rearview mirror, my house sat quiet, lights blazing, filled with women choking on the smoke from their own fire. A week can feel like a month when the air in your own house has turned toxic. For me, the 7 days away were clean, crisp, and blessedly simple. I stayed at a friend's cabin nestled in the hills just outside town, a place where the only sounds were the crackle of firewood, the wind sighing through the pines, and the steady beat of my own heart. There were no tribunals, no notebooks, no smug laughter echoing off the drywall. There was only silence, firewood, and the quiet dignity of my own company. It was a necessary exile, a time to let the rage cool into something more solid, more resolved. For Alara, I imagined those same 7 days felt like a prison sentence served in her own skin. I pictured her walking through our silent house, the shredded pieces of her constitution long since swept away, but their ghosts still littering the floor. I imagined her looking at my empty side of the bed, at my coffee mug sitting cold on the counter. I wondered if she'd called her friends. Had they tried to rally, to reinforce their shared delusion, or had my final words scattered them like birds before a storm? I didn't know, and for those 7 days, I didn't care. This was her test, not mine. I had already passed mine by walking out the door. When I finally pulled back into our driveway on the 8th day, the house looked smaller. Not physically, of course the same beige siding, the same black shutters, but it seemed diminished, as if it knew it had been caught hosting treason and was ashamed. Alara was waiting at the door. There was no circle of conspirators this time, no notebook clutched in her hand, just her. She looked thinner, not in body, but in spirit. It was as if 7 days of solitude had hollowed out her arrogance and left her raw. The designer top she'd worn that night was replaced by a simple gray sweatshirt. Her hair was tied back messily, and her face was free of makeup. The queen had abdicated her throne. "Hi," she said. The word was small, fragile, as if it had been rationed. I stepped inside. The familiar smell of our home, a mix of old books, fresh laundry, and Alara's perfume was overlaid with the faint, sharp sting of Lysol. The place was spotless. The floor gleamed, and there was no evidence of the confetti of shredded pages, no trace of the document that had briefly declared me an inmate in my own home. She closed the door softly behind me. "I was wrong," she blurted out, the words tumbling from her before I could even put down my bag. "I've spent this entire week thinking about every single word you said, about how stupid I was, how cruel. I thought I was being clever, maybe even funny." Her voice broke. "But I wasn't. I was humiliating you, my husband, and I hate myself for it." I studied her. I didn't listen to the words as much as I watched her eyes. They were the same eyes that had sparkled with righteous glee as she'd read Rule 11. They were red-rimmed now, but they were steady, and they were fixed on mine. "You wanted to impress them," I said flatly. It wasn't a question. "You wanted to fit in, so you turned me into the punchline of your little comedy routine." Tears welled instantly, spilling down her cheeks. "I know, and it was pathetic. I wanted their approval so badly that I forgot the only approval that should matter in this house is yours, and mine. I forgot that this marriage is supposed to be equal. I let them convince me that control equals strength. But it doesn't, Caleb. It's weakness. It was my weakness." For the first time since this nightmare began, there were no excuses, no deflections, just a naked admission of fault. I set down my keys and crossed my arms. "So what now, Alara? Another notebook? Another brainstorming session with Paige and her army of highlighters?" Her head shook violently from side to side. "They're gone. I told them. I told them not to come here again. I told Sabrina that what we did was despicable. I deleted the group chat. I'm done with them if being their friend means there's even the slightest risk of losing you." Her voice cracked on the last word, and a sob escaped her. I let the silence stretch, long and uncomfortable, long enough to make sure she understood this wasn't theater anymore. This was real life. "I told you before I left," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't live in a house where my dignity is negotiable. That rule still stands." "I know," she whispered, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I'll spend as long as it takes proving to you that I respect you, that I'm your partner, not your warden. Please, just give me the chance. And for the first time in 8 days, I let out a breath that wasn't laced with bitterness or anger. I stepped closer to her, close enough to see the way her shoulders trembled, close enough to smell the salt of her tears. Here's the deal, I said evenly. We move forward from this only if you understand one thing, completely and forever. Marriage is a partnership. It is not management. There are no performance reviews, no weekly allowances, no probation periods. If I ever, for 1 second, feel you slipping back into that mindset, Alara, if you even joke about putting me on a leash, you won't see me pack a bag for a week. You'll see me pack it for good. She nodded quickly, desperately, like a student who has finally understood the lesson just before the final exam. I understand, I promise. No more rules, no more stupid games. Just us, equals. I studied her one last time, searching for even a flicker of the insincerity, the self-satisfaction that had radiated from her that night. There was none. There was only a woman who had flown too close to the sun of her friend's toxic approval and had gotten scorched down to her very soul. Finally, I set my bag down by the stairs. Good, I said, my voice softer now. Because I didn't marry a committee. I married you. Remember that. Her tears spilled over again, but this time they were mixed with a profound, shuddering relief. She stepped forward cautiously, as if approaching a wounded animal she was terrified of spooking. And when I didn't step back, she wrapped her arms around my waist and sobbed into my chest, her body shaking with the force of a week's worth of fear and regret. For the first time since that cursed night, I let my arms close around her. Not because the pain was erased. It wasn't. A betrayal like that leaves a scar. But because the first brick in the long, arduous process of rebuilding had just been laid, and it had been laid on a foundation of truth. In the quiet of our home, I thought back to my own words. When men get upset, we just leave. It was true in its own brutal way. But sometimes, just sometimes, if the woman waiting at the door has truly, fundamentally learned her lesson, we come back. Ilara had her 7 days to think. Now it was my turn to watch, to see if she could live the lesson she had learned in the crucible of her own making. It's funny. To this day, Rachel still shudders if she sees a new notebook lying open on a table. Paige tried texting her once a month after that night. Alara left her on read. Sabrina waved from across the aisle in the grocery store. Alara turned her cart around and walked the other way. Lorraine, Cassidy, Giselle, they became ghosts, haunting a part of her past she had walled off for good. As for me, I never needed revenge. Not really. Watching their smug little empire of arrogance collapse in on itself in the space of 30 minutes was plenty. Sometimes the best punishment is letting people sit alone in a quiet room with nothing but the echo of their own stupidity for company. And Alara, she's different now. She's careful. She's respectful. Not out of fear, but out of a deep and abiding understanding of what partnership actually means. Maybe losing me for a week taught her more than any performance review ever could. There are no more written rules in this house. No lists, no privilege revocations. There are just two people, one marriage, and the silent, unbreakable understanding that dignity isn't up for negotiation. And if she ever forgets, well, I still have Paige's old notebook somewhere in my office. Torn to hell, yes, but taped back together just enough to serve as a reminder of how quickly laughter can die when respect leaves the room.